We need someone with fresh ideas for this division, someone who understands modern efficiency. I'd been standing in that conference room for 30 years. Not that exact room. We'd moved buildings twice since I started, but the same position, field operations manager, the guy who made sure driftline construction actually built things that didn't fall down. My name's Howard Ames, 61 years old. 30 years at Driftline, the last 20 overseeing every major commercial project in Columbus, Ohio. I'd kept my head down, my sites compliant, and my crews safe. Never missed a deadline that wasn't killed by weather or supply chains. But Jordan Blake, our new chief operating officer, fresh from some tech company in California, looked at me like I was an outdated piece of equipment. He'd been with us 6 weeks. I'd been pouring foundations when he was still in college. The board wants a restructuring plan by next quarter, he continued, not making eye contact as he scrolled through his tablet. We need to cut overhead and streamline the old processes. The old processes, the ones that kept our buildings standing and our permits in order. I nodded and said, I understand. That was it. No argument. No defense. Just acknowledgement. He seemed surprised by that, expecting pushback, maybe even hoping for it. Something to justify what I already knew was coming. The meeting ended with nothing decided, but everything understood. I was being phased out. 30 years of institutional knowledge labeled as overhead. When I got back to my office, a cramped space with filing cabinets and site maps covering every wall, I opened my bottom drawer. Inside was a thick blue folder I'd been maintaining for 8 years. Not for this day specifically, more like insurance against the day someone made a catastrophic decision. Every corner cut. Every inspection rushed. Every permit finessed. All documented, dated, and annotated in my neat block handwriting. Not that I'd done these things. I'd fought against each one. But when executives made decisions from boardrooms about timelines that couldn't work in the real world, I kept records. When we started work before permits cleared, I noted it. When we used materials different from specifications, I wrote it down. I closed the drawer without taking the folder out. Not yet. Maybe it wouldn't come to that. But as I watched through my office window, I saw Jordan shake hands with a young man in an expensive suit. They were laughing, looking toward my office. That's when I knew. I started at Driftline back when old man Franklin Dre still ran things. Frank had built the company from a residential contractor into one of the biggest commercial developers in central Ohio. He taught me that buildings were about people, not just profits. Every shortcut shows up eventually, Howard, he'd say during site inspections. Might be next week, might be next decade, but gravity and water always collect their debts. I took that to heart, becoming known as the Blueprint Man, the guy who followed plans to the letter, who knew every building code by heart, who could spot a potential issue before the first shovel hit dirt. When Frank retired and his son Thomas took over in 2010, things started changing. Thomas was ambitious, impatient. He wanted growth, wanted to compete with the national firms. Not necessarily bad goals, but his methods worried me. We need to be more aggressive, he'd say in management meetings. Everyone bends the rules a little. We're leaving money on the table being so cautious. The first time we started foundation work without final permit approval, I raised hell. Thomas pulled me aside. Howard, you're valuable to this company, but things have changed. Sometimes we need to start early to meet deadlines. The permits always come through eventually. He was right about that last part. They did always come through, because I had relationships with every inspector and zoning official in the county. People who trusted me when I said issues would be fixed. People who believed me because for 3 decades, I'd never lied to them. The blue folder started that day. Not out of spite, but self-preservation. If something went wrong, I needed to show I'd objected. Over the years, my objections became quieter. I still raised concerns, but I documented more and argued less. I became known as the old-school guy, reliable but behind the times. Meanwhile, I watched young project managers get promoted based on how quickly they completed jobs, not how well they were built. I noticed how Thomas kept moving more aggressive people into leadership roles. 5 months ago, I met Jordan for the first time. 35 years old with an MBA and no construction experience. Thomas introduced him as the future of Driftline's operations strategy. I shook his hand and knew immediately. The slow fracture that had been spreading through the company's foundation for years had finally reached my office door. Howard, we're restructuring the field operations division. Jordan sat across from me, flanked by Vanessa from Human Resources. 3 months had passed since our first meeting. In that time, he'd brought in consultants, held closed-door sessions with the board, and hired 4 new managers, all under 40, all with business degrees rather than construction experience. The company is moving toward a more distributed model of site supervision, he continued. We'll be eliminating the central field operations manager position and creating specialized team leads who report directly to project development. I nodded, face neutral. This wasn't a discussion. This was notification. After 30 years, the board feels you deserve a respectful transition. We're offering 6 months severance, extended health benefits, and consulting opportunities should specific projects require your expertise. Translation: we're firing you, but nicely. We might call if we get desperate. When would this take effect? I asked, voice steady. Immediately. Today will be your last day in the office. Jordan glanced at his watch. Vanessa will help you with the paperwork and collecting your personal items. 30 years ended in a 15-minute meeting. I didn't argue. Didn't remind them that I knew every inspector by name. Didn't mention the dozens of times I'd saved projects by calling in favors with city officials. Didn't tell them that permits don't just come through eventually anymore. Not since budget cuts had made inspectors more cautious and less flexible. Instead, I signed the papers, shook Jordan's hand, and followed Vanessa to my office. As I packed my coffee mug and the photo of my late wife, Catherine, I saw Thomas watching from the hallway. He nodded once. Acknowledgement, not apology. Then disappeared into the elevator. I took nothing from the filing cabinets. Those were company records. Except for the blue folder, which I slipped into my bag. That was my record. By noon, I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot. Key in the ignition, but engine off. Through the windshield, I could see the Columbus skyline. 6 buildings I'd helped construct standing tall against the clouds. I'd given this company everything. Missed basketball games when my son was growing up. Worked weekends when Catherine was sick. Lost myself in the job after she passed. For what? To be escorted out like I was obsolete equipment? I started the truck but didn't drive home. Instead, I headed downtown to the Office of Building Safety. Gloria Daniels had been a junior inspector when I first met her 25 years ago. Now she was the department head. Howard, she said, surprised to see me walk in. What brings you by? Problem with one of the sites? Not anymore, I replied. I've been let go. Her eyebrows shot up. Driftline fired you? Are they insane? I shrugged. They're restructuring. Well, their loss, she said. You want to grab coffee, catch up? I placed the blue folder on her desk. Actually, I think you should read this first. 2 weeks passed. I hadn't heard anything from Driftline or Gloria. I spent the time organizing my home office and fielding calls from old colleagues expressing shock at my departure. The severance checks started coming in, a decent amount, but less than promised when prorated over 6 months. My phone rang on a Tuesday morning. Jordan Blake. Howard, I hope you're doing well, he said, voice overly casual. Listen, we're having some issues with the Riverside Plaza project, and I was hoping you might consult for a day or two. Riverside Plaza, the biggest project in Driftline's pipeline, a multi-use development with retail, offices, and luxury apartments. Ground had broken 3 months ago. What kind of issues? I asked. Just some permit questions. The city inspector is making a fuss about modified plans that weren't resubmitted. Nothing major, but it's holding things up. Gloria. Had to be. I'd be happy to help, I said. My consulting rate is $300 an hour, 2-day minimum retainer up front. Silence on the line. Then, that's steep, Howard. We were thinking more along the lines of your previous salary equivalent. That was an employee rate. I'm a consultant now, I replied. and experienced consultants with my specific knowledge don't come cheap. More silence. Let me talk to Thomas and get back to you. They called back the same day, Thomas himself agreeing to my terms but making it clear this was a one-time arrangement. I signed their hastily prepared contract and agreed to meet the project manager at the Riverside site the next morning. When I arrived, I could see the problem immediately. They'd expanded the foundation footprint beyond what was in the approved plans, encroaching nearly 6 feet into the setback zone, likely to add square footage to the retail space. Classic driftline move these days. Ask forgiveness, not permission. Jordan was waiting with Alan Pierce, the project manager. "Howard, thanks for coming," Jordan said, all smiles now. "We've got a situation with Inspector Daniels. She's claiming we've violated setback requirements and threatening to issue a stop work order." "Have you violated the setbacks?" I asked. Alan shuffled his feet. "The approved plans had a 40-foot setback. We modified to 34 based on market demand for larger retail footprints." "And you submitted revised plans?" "They're in process," Jordan cut in, "but we needed to keep the project moving. Surely you understand how these things work, Howard. We were hoping you could talk to Inspector Daniels, explain the situation. She's always respected you." I nodded slowly. "I see. You want me to use my relationship with Gloria to convince her to look the other way while you correct the paperwork?" "Essentially, yes," Jordan admitted. "It's just bureaucratic red tape. The modification is minor." I walked the site, checking measurements and taking notes. The violation wasn't minor. It affected drainage calculations, emergency access routes, and utility hookups. "I'll speak with Gloria," I finally said. "But I need copies of everything. Original plans, modified plans, permit applications, approval letters. Everything." They provided the files without hesitation, eager to have me solve their problem. That afternoon, I called Gloria from my home office. "You've been busy," she said when she answered. "They asked me to intervene on Riverside," I replied. "I thought they might. What did you tell them?" "That I'd talk to you." She chuckled. "And will you convince me to overlook their creative interpretation of the approved plans?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to help you understand exactly what they've changed, when they changed it, and what other sites might have similar issues." The trap wasn't just Riverside. It was every active driftline project in the city. Gloria and I met at a small coffee shop far from both downtown and Driftline's offices. I brought my files. She brought hers. "After I read your documentation," she said, stirring her coffee, "I started pulling every Driftline permit application from the past 5 years. Comparing approved plans with inspection reports, the pattern is clear." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos from 8 different construction sites. Each showed subtle but significant deviations from approved plans: extra square footage, modified structural elements, different materials than specified. "They've been systematically building beyond permit approvals," she continued. "Small enough changes that a rushed inspector might miss them, but significant enough to impact safety and compliance." I wasn't surprised, but seeing the evidence laid out was still jarring. This wasn't just cutting corners to save time. This was intentional, calculated violation of building codes. "The worst part," Gloria said, lowering her voice, "is that Thomas Dre has been pressuring my department for years, calling city council members when we enforce codes, suggesting we're anti-business. 2 of my inspectors were reassigned after flagging driftline violations." That was new information. The corruption went beyond driftline. It had infected the city government. "Why come to me now?" I asked. "You've known about this for years." Gloria looked tired. "Because your documentation provides a pattern. It's not one inspector's word against a powerful company. It's systematic, and because—" She hesitated. "Because what?" "Because I'm retiring in 3 months, Howard. I've got nothing to lose now, but I need someone who knows the details, who can explain the technical violations to people who don't understand construction." I sat back, processing this. Driftline hadn't just fired me. They'd removed the one person who could testify about their violations with absolute authority. There's more, I said, opening my own folder. After they let me go, I reviewed my personal notes from the past 8 years. Every project has issues, but there's a pattern to drift lines. They're not random shortcuts. It's strategic. I showed her my analysis, how Driftline consistently modified plans after approval in ways that increased sellable or leasable space, how they substituted materials in ways that looked identical but saved thousands per project, how they built faster by starting before permits were finalized, assuming approvals would come through. How high does this go? Gloria asked. Thomas knows everything. The project managers implement his vision. Jordan was brought in to streamline the process, make it more efficient, which means fewer checks and balances. And now they want you to help them continue the pattern. I nodded. They think I'm desperate or loyal or both. Gloria finished her coffee thinking, the Riverside violation is enough for me to issue a stop work order. But if we're going to address the systemic issues, we need to hit all of it at once, I finished. Every active project, full inspections, document reviews, material testing. That would effectively shut down Driftline's entire operation for weeks, maybe months, Gloria said. The economic impact would be massive. Jobs lost, projects delayed. Projects that aren't being built to code, I interrupted. Buildings where people will work and live. I've spent my career ensuring those buildings are safe. I'm not stopping now just because they took my job. Gloria nodded slowly. All right, Howard, let's do this right. I need everything you have, organized by project. Names, dates, specific violations. We'll start with comprehensive inspections of all active sites. I left the coffee shop not feeling vindicated, but resolved. This wasn't about revenge. It was about doing what I'd always done, ensuring buildings were built right. Only now I was doing it from the outside. The next morning I met Jordan at the Riverside site as promised. He was anxious, pacing near the construction trailer. Did you speak with Inspector Daniels? He asked immediately. I did, I replied calmly. We discussed the situation at length. Hope flashed across his face. And? Can we continue work while the revised plans are processed? I explained the technical aspects of the modifications, I said carefully. The setback changes, the drainage implications, the utility conflicts. Jordan frowned. That doesn't answer my question, Howard. She's following proper protocol, Jordan. The modifications are substantial enough to require full review. You'll need to pause work on the affected areas until approval comes through. His face darkened. That's not what we brought you in for. You brought me in for my expertise and relationships, I corrected him. I provided both. My professional opinion is that the modifications require review, and my relationship with Inspector Daniels means she explained the process thoroughly rather than simply issuing a stop work order. This is bullshit, he snapped. Thomas assured me you'd smooth this over. I maintained eye contact. I've done exactly what my contract specified, consulted on the permit issues. My recommendation is to revert to the approved plans immediately or prepare for significant delays. Jordan stormed off to make a phone call, to Thomas, undoubtedly. I used the opportunity to speak with the site foreman, Luis, who I'd known for 15 years. They've got you building outside the permits, I said quietly. Luis looked uncomfortable. Orders from above. They said the revised permits were coming. They're not, and more inspectors will be visiting soon. If I were you, I'd make sure everything that is being built matches exactly what's on the approved plans. Nothing more, nothing less. Luis got the message. He'd been around long enough to know what was coming. Thomas called me that afternoon, his voice taut with controlled anger. Jordan tells me you've decided not to help us with the Riverside situation. I helped exactly as contracted, I replied. I provided expert consultation on the permit issues. Don't play games, Howard, you know what we needed. You needed someone to help you circumvent building codes and permit requirements. That was never my job at Driftline, and it's certainly not my job as a consultant. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Thomas spoke again. I've always respected you, Howard. That's why we offered such a generous severance. But if you're working against Driftline's interests now, we'll need to reconsider our arrangement. The threat was clear. Back off or lose the severance. Do what you feel is necessary, Thomas. I'll be doing the same. I hung up and immediately called Gloria. It's happening. Thomas just threatened to cancel my severance. We're ready, she replied. Inspection teams are being assembled. We'll start tomorrow with Riverside, then hit the other sites throughout the week. They'll try to clean things up once they realize what's happening. That's why we're moving fast. And Howard, the city attorney wants to meet with you. Your documentation is crucial to any potential enforcement action. The next morning, I watched from my truck across the street as Gloria arrived at the Riverside site with 3 additional inspectors and a city attorney. I could see Jordan's panicked expression, the rapid phone calls, the huddled conversations with site managers. By noon, construction had stopped completely. Workers stood in groups, uncertain what to do as inspectors methodically documented every deviation from approved plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Luis. "What the hell did you do?" I didn't respond. This wasn't personal. It was about doing the job right, even if I wasn't on the payroll anymore. 1 month later, I sat in the back row of the city council chamber as Gloria presented her findings. The room was packed. Contractors, developers, Driftline employees, reporters. Thomas and Jordan sat in the front row, their attorneys flanking them. Gloria's presentation was methodical, devastating in its precision. Slide after slide showed documented violations across 12 Driftline projects. Material substitutions that compromised structural integrity. Expanded building footprints that violated setback requirements. Foundations poured before permits were approved. These are not isolated incidents or honest mistakes, Gloria concluded. Our investigation, supported by extensive documentation from former Driftline operations manager Howard Ames, reveals a pattern of intentional code violations spanning at least 8 years. Thomas turned in his seat, eyes searching until they found me. The look wasn't angry. It was defeated. The city attorney stood next. Based on these findings, we've issued emergency stop work orders for all active Driftline projects. Additionally, we're requiring comprehensive inspections of all Driftline buildings completed in the past 10 years, at the company's expense. The chamber erupted in murmurs. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was potentially catastrophic for Driftline. Furthermore, the attorney continued when the room quieted, we've referred this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges regarding the falsification of permit documents. Jordan's face went pale. He'd signed many of those documents after taking over operations. I didn't stay for the rest. I didn't need to see Thomas making statements to reporters, or Jordan huddled with attorneys. I didn't need to witness Driftline's public unraveling. As I walked to my truck, my phone rang. It was Peter Hammond, owner of Ashenbrook Supply Co., one of Driftline's competitors. "Howard," he said when I answered. "I heard what happened. We should talk. I need someone who knows how to do things right." 6 months later, I stood on the 19th floor of a half-finished office tower in downtown Columbus, watching as crews installed steel framing precisely according to specifications. The wind whipped around me, but I barely felt the cold. "The city inspector signed off on the modified drainage plan," said Megan, my new assistant at Ashenbrook Construction. Said it was the most thorough documentation she'd ever seen. I nodded, satisfied. "Good. Schedule the concrete pour for next week, weather permitting, and make sure the environmental monitors are in place before they start." My phone buzzed, a news alert. I'd set up notifications for anything mentioning Driftline construction. The headline was brief. Driftline CEO Thomas Dre steps down amid ongoing investigations. I put the phone away without reading further. Driftline had survived. Barely. The stop work orders had eventually been lifted on projects that could be brought into compliance. But the company had lost millions, its reputation shattered. Jordan had resigned 3 months ago, quietly returning to California. My new office at Ashenbrook was smaller than my old one at Driftline, but I didn't mind. The title, Director of Compliance and Quality Control, came with authority to halt any project that deviated from approved plans. Peter Hammond had been clear. He'd hired me to keep his company honest, not to find shortcuts. As Megan and I rode the construction elevator down to ground level, she asked, "Do you ever regret what happened with Driftline? They were part of your life for so long." I considered this as we stepped onto solid ground. Around us, the construction site hummed with purposeful activity. Every worker, every beam, every bolt was exactly where it should be. "No," I finally answered. "I don't regret doing the job right, never have, never will." I looked up at the rising building, straight, true, and built to last, just like it should be.